The Mummy, the most disappointing movie of 2017. Universal Studios is best known for its big hit movies such as Jurassic Park, Back to the Future, and Jaws, but back in the day, it was notorious for being the unrivaled home of the Universal Monsters. They were the face of the studio, but over time their popularity died out in the mid-1950s with Creature from the Black Lagoon being their final silver screen horror icon. Today, ever since Marvel superhero crossovers, shared universes have been the big thing, so Universal joined in to create their own dark universe, as they call it, by bringing back the classic monsters in a series of reboots, resulting in The Mummy as its first installment. Here's the story. Princess Amunet is next in line for the throne when her father's second wife gives birth to a son. Determined to keep the throne for herself, she enlists the help of Set, the god of the desert, storms, violence, and just overall chaos in the ancient Egyptian religion. He agrees to help her if, in return, his spirit is transferred to human form by use of a dagger. So after killing her whole family, she's about to sacrifice her lover when she's caught, condemned to be mummified, and buried alive for all eternity, with her sarcophagus submerged in a pool of mercury so that her monstrous form cannot escape. Nick Morton, played by Tom Cruise, is on an expedition with his partner Chris Vail when they unearth the tomb of Amunet in present-day Iraq. They investigate the tomb with archaeologist Jenny Halsey, who discovers it's a prison. Nick cuts the sarcophagus loose, unknowingly unleashing the mummy from her imprisonment, which puts him under a curse. Then Chris gets bitten by a camel spider that eventually leads to his possession on the transport flight back to England. He attacks everyone on board, leaving Nick no choice but to kill him. As a flock of crows surround the plane, Nick parachutes Jenny to safety right before a crash lands and everybody dies. Except for Nick. He wakes up in a morgue the next day and is told by Chris's ghost that there's no escaping Amunet. At the crash site, the mummy is freed from her sarcophagus and begins feeding on the rescue workers to regenerate her decomposed body, turning them into undead minions. She lures Nick to a nearby church where she attempts to complete her ritual by sacrificing him to Set. He escapes with Jenny as a big chase scene breaks out right before soldiers show up to subdue Amunet, led by Henry Jekyll, played by Russell Crowe. He's in possession of the Book of the Dead, which, interestingly, is the same prop used in the Brendan Fraser trilogy with some minor changes. Javier Bardem was originally chosen for the role, but ended up being cast as the Frankenstein monster in the upcoming Bride of Frankenstein instead, set for 2019. Speaking of Bride of Frankenstein, Russell Crowe is quoting a line from the 1935 original when he says, "To a new world of gods and monsters." Fun fact. Anyway, during Amunet's capture, Dr. Jekyll confirms Nick's curse and explains his intentions to go through with the ritual by allowing Set to possess him, ending his reign of chaos forever. He tries to persuade him by reassuring that there's always a choice between good and evil, even as a monster. Dr. Jekyll then transforms into Edward Hyde and all havoc breaks loose. Nick manages to inject him with a serum to change him back, as the mummy escapes and ravages London with a huge sandstorm and an army of followers, leaving behind a path of destruction. Chris guides Nick and Jenny to an underground tunnel where they're attacked by Amunet's minions. Amunet captures and kills Jenny in hope that Nick will succumb to his fate. He tricks her by pretending to give in, only to steal the dagger and destroy the ruby, which would break the curse. Instead, he stabs himself, sacrificing his body to be possessed by Set. He is about to hold up his end of the bargain by joining Amunet, but as he sees Jenny's lifeless body, he regains control and overpowers Amunet by sucking the life out of her until she's a shriveled corpse. He then summons the power of Set to resurrect Jenny, only to say goodbye to her as he doesn't know what he is anymore. After that, he disappears into the desert where he resurrects Chris, and the two set off for an adventure. So, what? Is he supposed to be like a superhero now or something? That's not scary. And seriously, what kind of a horse stirs up that much sand? Here's my problem with this movie. As a standalone action-adventure mummy film, sure, it delivers. The Brendan Fraser trilogy rebooted the series back in 1999 as an action-adventure comedy, and that's fine because that's all it was trying to be, its own thing. But I grew up with a strong appreciation for the 1932 original starring Boris Karloff, and was under the impression that the writers were studying these old classics as research in order to construct a faithful remake. This movie couldn't seem to find a balance between action, adventure, and comedy. Yes, comedy. Keep in mind this is a horror film. I can understand some minor comic relief here and there, but there's too much of it and it just comes off as corny. I felt that Jake Johnson's character brought nothing to the film and was just unnecessary and annoying. And they never once refer to Amunet as The Mummy. You'd think with that being the title of the movie that, maybe they... whatever. It just doesn't feel like it's trying to adapt the horror elements of the original. But in reality, these movies will never be duplicated. Not because it's not possible, but because it's not profitable. There's something about the lack of music, the creepy title cards, the occasional crackling of the film reel, the simple plot, handcrafted sets, and makeup jobs that make these movies so memorable. You're never going to see a studio today make a movie with that description, as everything's about CGI and overcomplicated storylines. It doesn't have to make sense, just as long as there's explosions. Don't get me wrong, CGI is a great tool to have, but only when used as needed. The classics used special effects like the Invisible Man and the Wolfman, and although that's all they had available to them at the time, they still didn't oversaturate the film with the latest technology just because they can. Today, it's expected. It's great that it's so advanced that you can't even tell the difference, but what about the filmmakers who still want to use practical effects? The scene where the aircraft is falling out of the sky was actually done without the full help of CG, and all the crew members were throwing up while shooting. So standing ovation for the real-life stunt work, but when all the credit is just going to mistakenly go to green screen anyway, it's almost like, what's the point? And that's upsetting because I respect the extra work that goes into it. I also have to give this movie props for actually showing the monster. Most horror films now rely on shadows and jump scares and never actually show the monster's face except for a split second before it disappears into the darkness again. I like to be able to see the monster. The creature's hand is a nice touch too. So I don't hate this movie, I'm just kind of disappointed in it. Sort of like when a parent says, I'm not angry, just disappointed. I never knew what that meant until now. Sure, they'll never live up to what they're trying to recreate with the originals, but I still think they could have done better than this. 2014's Dracula Untold was originally going to be the first installment of the Dark Universe, but was pulled from the lineup because its connection to the rest of the films was downplayed. Also, it sucked, so that didn't help hype the project. That being said, the Dark Universe is off to a rough start with The Mummy not doing very well either. This whole shared universe idea is nothing new. Universal Studios was actually the first to do it in 1943's Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. Then others followed, like House of Dracula and Abbott and Costello Meet Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So Marvel can't really take credit for inventing the idea, but I guess they can for renewing it. Despite my negative opinion of this movie, I'm still very interested to see what comes next in the series, because as a fan of this stuff, I have hope that they can still turn everything around and make an awesome Dark Universe. They did it before, they can do it again.
To a new world of gods and monsters.